The time when governments could offer an explanation for what they're doing and expect to have it accepted is over. The practice of lying about why they're doing something, laying a false trail, is hopelessly and forever exposed. Governments, whoever's behind governments, the media pushing the narratives of those governments, are going to have to accept that with the advent of the internet and social media and the rest, we, the interested and inquiring citizens, can find out for ourselves what's going on. We can't be fooled anymore. Whatever a government wants to do, more importantly, why they want to do it, they're going to have to pull on their big boy and big girl pants and tell the people the truth up front. Because if they don't, we find out that truth anyway in what they used to call a New York Minute. Which brings me to the latest laughable hypocrisy by the BBC. Amid the launch of Verify, a new state-sponsored Ministry of Truth, if ever there was one, the BBC's own newly stamped disinformation correspondent, Marianna Spring, revealed that as part of her own pursuit of truth, she had created fake social media profiles, complete with made-up names and photos. Quote, "I have some undercover accounts set up for BBC's Americast podcast," she wrote. "These help in understanding the polarisation online. This is fascinating, to say the least." Those accounts set up during the 2022 midterm elections are Larry, a faith and flag conservative, Brittany from the populist right, Gabriella, the stressed sideliner, Michael, the Democratic mainstay, and Emma from the progressive left, all made up fiction. It's self-evident that those accounts, fake and misleading, are disinformation or misinformation, and by their very existence could presumably exacerbate the polarisation they're claimed to monitor. Spring's highfalutin claim in defence of the fake accounts is that they enable the pursuit of truth. Who's kidding who here? Mistruths can cause really serious harm to society and to the people in them, she wrote. Is a mistruth the same as a lie? And if so, why not just use that more straightforward and precise word, lie? Or is the use of mistruth a slippery way of condemning and setting aside an alternative, valid interpretation of events and reality that the BBC simply does not like and certainly doesn't want widely circulated? Spring highlights her concerns about what she calls the conspiracy theory movement. Quote, "And then there's also investigating other mistruths and the real-world harm they can cause," she wrote. She writes about how the UK's conspiracy theory movement has evolved and intensified since the pandemic. Let's remember that so much ridiculed as conspiracy theory is revealed in the fullness of time as truth. She's also determinedly looking for connections between conspiracy and far-right figures. Are we to conclude that only the so-called far-right is to be subject to BBC scrutiny, that no one on the left, whatever the left is now, has any views that might be regarded as extreme? Consider, for example, the published views of one Oscar Bentley, now among the BBC's political fact-checkers. Bentley was described by the Daily Mail back in April as hard left, who has described Conservative MPs as lower than invertebrates and has said, "Never trust a Tory." Bentley's job's to help fact-check the content of political debates, a role a reasonable person might have assumed demanded demonstrable political impartiality. But apparently not, according to that BBC fact-checker. We must never trust a Tory on account of them having snake-like anatomy. I would say his mindset appears less than objective. Let me be clear, as we do say now, that I've no faith whatever in the honesty of members of any political party over another, Labour, Tory, Liberal, SNP, nor indeed whether they have spines. Apart from a couple of honourable exceptions, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could spit them. But here is the BBC, funded by a compulsory tax on the public, seeking to claim the moral high ground, a lofty perch literally overlooking its own newsroom, upon which to build a veritable fortress, a Camelot of objectivity, trustworthiness and truth. This is the same BBC that has in recent times carried headlines like the one on the 7th of July 2021, "Rural Racism in Dorset. Why is our countryside 98% white?" and also made repeated uses of the triple whammy of pale, stale and male. Objective, the BBC. I could go on and on about glaring inappropriateness of the BBC seeking to set itself up as a paragon of a virtue, but the fact is their hypocrisy also exposes an inconvenient truth, which is that the state is, it seems to be, now so frustrated with regular people talking among themselves, doing their own research into topics that interest them, and sharing information online, it has opted for declaring itself the source of truth while dismissing other voices as mistruths, conspiracy theory. Remember when Jacinda Ardern, former PM of New Zealand, urged her citizens to make her government the sole source of truth in the land? If that didn't make your blood run cold in your veins, I don't know what would. Here in Britain, the state broadcaster now seeks more and more obviously to style its propagandists and activists as the Ministry of Truth. Too late though. Too many people here and around the world are now so sensitive to and therefore deliberately distanced from the state propaganda and so usefully immersed instead in legitimate sources of information. That's not misinformation or disinformation, it's just information. That the antics of those who would treat us like naughty children and read to us while we sit on the naughty step are too glaringly obvious ever to be trusted again. The truth, the actual truth of the world is self-evident. Each of us knows the difference between right and wrong without having to be told. We know when something feels wrong, sounds wrong, smells wrong, is wrong. Some might choose to do the wrong thing anyway, or to stand silent while wrong goes about its murky business, but each knows the difference just the same. The battle between truth and lies, between right and wrong, is increasingly about straightforward fundamentals. The ownership and control of the land we live on, the source and nature of the food we eat and that we must feed to our children, our freedom to ask questions of authority, freedom to go where we please in a free country without first proving our identity, freedom to buy and sell in privacy without the state and banks monitoring what we're doing, freedom from a future in which decisions about what we can or cannot do with our money might be made not by us but by others we do not know. If the prospect, the threat of some or all of this and more besides feels wrong to you, that's because it is. What's being contemplated by some now, foisted upon us now, is wrong. The emergence of a BBC effort like Verify is a symptom of a state more and more determined to be the only source of information. This growing intention to make dissent first uncomfortable and then increasingly impossible should give everyone pause for thought. Where choice is replaced by no choice or by nudging or perhaps coercion, a population must be rightly suspicious of the motives on the part of those driving the change. I've already mentioned the land. What is the truth about state intentions regarding our land, specifically farmland? On this point, we absolutely need truth because it's literally about the ground beneath our feet that provides the very stuff of our lives. In the Netherlands, the government is loudly determined to drive farmers off the land they have farmed for generations in line with the EU's Natura 2000 regulations. A third of Dutch cattle must go in order to combat a nitrogen crisis, a crisis that exists not in reality, but in the projections and predictions prepared by those in power and driving the so-called green agenda. The same is simmering on the other side of the Atlantic. On the 10th of May, at an Agriculture and Climate Summit hosted by the US Department of Agriculture, Joe Biden's climate czar, John Kerry, said net zero targets would not be reached without addressing greenhouse gas emissions from American farms. According to Kerry, farming creates a third of the world's total carbon emissions. He said cutting those emissions had to be front and centre of the war on global warming. He has said government confiscation of farmers' land was not off the table. If it's really the truth that we're trying to save the planet, shouldn't the priority be food independence? Perhaps an approach involving growing natural, good food as close to home as possible, an approach to eating fresh, seasonal food rather than flying food in from thousands of miles away. Who in their right mind would put central government in control of food, as if history says government collectivisation of farming has ever gone well? Let's not forget that when Stalin and Mao took control of farmland, tens of millions died of starvation and disease. I'll happily go on record to say we're not being told the truth about why so much is being changed without our consent. Entities we're supposed to trust say change is driven by the need to save the world and to drive equity and diversity. I say the truth of it all is too uncomfortable for them to say out loud. I say the world is being changed in the name of control of the many by the few. Same old, control of the land, 15-minute ghettos, digital currencies and ID, net zero. None of it's about saving the world and all of it's about control. I had hoped that after all the shouting down of voices questioning the way government handled the COVID debacle, things might have got easier, that speaking up on the latest issues of concern might have been accepted as the right thing to do. But no, the truth is that speaking out and asking questions is now even more likely to draw ridicule, insult and cancellation. Rather than being listened to, people are even more casually dehumanised, reduced to labels of the most offensive sort: racist, anti-Semitic, far-right extremist, calumnies that disgrace the spouter of the bile rather than its intended target. I've been on the receiving end of all of the above and more besides, and I hold the purveyors of such misapplied filth in the lowest regard. But in the new normal, none of what used to be minded as the rules of polite discourse matters at all, and individuals are apparently to be reduced, traduced, rendered into something to be regarded as despicable and dismissible. But here's the thing: the truth has not moved and has not changed. The truth is where it always was and what it always was. If a government, its propagandists and apparatchiks have to come up with a new office and a new label to try and persuade us they're telling the truth, then I say that ship has sailed.